Welcome back to Digging Deeper, hosted by Clarity Development Advisor. I'm Dave Onashenko.
I'm Rainen Zones.
And Happy New Year.
Yeah,
Had a good break. You guys had a good break?
hopefully. I did.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I did as well. It was
yeah,
great and
yeah.
excited for the new year. Excited to keep doing this. We're going to be doing it now on Fridays at 11 this time if you're joining us live. Otherwise, if you're in watching us later, we're doing it Fridays at 11 now for the foreseeable future. Try a different time. So join us if you want to watch it live. And as always, we say encourage you to, if you're watching live, put some stuff in the chat. We respond to questions on the fly. If you're watching afterwards, then add stuff in the comments. We're great. We like to respond back and kind of go from there.
Yeah, for sure. So we have a special guest on today, and Dave, why don't you give him a little introduction?
Well, which one are we talking? Our four-legged guest, or are we talking our guest that's joining us and is going to actually answer questions?
Let's start with our guest who's going to answer questions, and then we'll get to our four-legged guest.
Fantastic. So today we have James Knull joining us from Mogul Realty. Mogul is based in Edmonton, but James is actually joining us from his Vancouver office. James, why don't you before I undersell what you do, because I've heard a bit about, especially as you've kind of jumped back and forth between Edmonton and Vancouver. What is it that Mogul does? Tell us a bit about you. Tell us a bit about the company and why you are not in Edmonton today and what brings you back and forth.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction, Dave. So my name's James, and I'm the founder and owner of Mogul Realty Group. We are essentially a group of realtors. There's about 15 of us in Edmonton and about 8 in Vancouver. So we're a multi-province real estate firm, and our primary focus is investor clientele, which means that we're helping people do everything from buy their first income rental property, flipping property, fourplex, duplex, multifamily, commercial development sites. Basically, if it's in the real estate world and there's an opportunity to treat it as an investment for earning income and creating profit, we like to be a part of it. And so a huge reason why we have a Vancouver office is because Edmonton's a hotspot for Vancouver capital. And so I'm here acting as that liaison between provinces. People in the British Columbia market like what the Alberta market has to offer. Conversely, people in the Alberta market like what the British Columbia market has to offer. They're two incredibly different marketplaces, which provides Western Canadians with an opportunity to diversify their investment portfolios. There's no better, it's just different. And because we work with investors, we do encourage people to diversify. So having a headquarters in both provinces allows us to provide on-the-ground advisory for both markets.
Well, that's awesome. That's actually really cool. And I want to dig deeper, pun intended, into that a bit more. Um, Tell us, I guess, in a nutshell, we don't need to get into semantics right now. What is attractive about the Edmonton market from a Vancouver investment capital perspective? And then maybe transition kind of vice versa in terms of that diversification capital going the other way.
Yeah, absolutely. So the thing that's really appealing about the Alberta market really starts with the price point available to buy property with compared to the major Canadian markets of Vancouver and Toronto. Alberta looks incredibly affordable. If you take at any given property, for example, in Edmonton, transplant it into the equivalent neighborhood in Vancouver, you're seeing 3 to 4 times higher price point for an almost identical property.
Unreal.
You know, that's a big deal. So when we flip it the other way, someone from Vancouver comes to Edmonton and sees the price point of property as a very, very attractive price point. The second, and I would say even more important consideration for Edmonton and Alberta is what we call the cost of living index, which means that because Edmonton is so much more affordable, it's much easier to get cash flow from an investor perspective, which means that the ratio of the average mortgage payment on an average property compared to the average rental amount that can be collected on that property,
Mm-hmm.
that average relationship translates into being able to own a property and make money every month. Whereas in Vancouver, it's not quite the case
You're
because
going to be
property
feeding it.
values, of course, you're almost always feeding it in Vancouver.
Yeah.
And so the reason that we say diversity is because Vancouver traditionally grows. It's an equity play.
Right.
So often what we see our clients do is buy some properties in Vancouver that they lose money on every month for the big picture of equity growth. and then they buy some properties in Edmonton that make money every month to balance out their portfolio, because Edmonton doesn't traditionally grow in terms of property values nearly as aggressively. So if you pair those two types of property together, you've got a well-balanced portfolio for both growth and stability in terms of monthly income.
Interesting.
That's phenomenal. I guess on that, I mean, in terms of that equity growth, that seems like, so I'll give you an example. There was I talked to a friend in Toronto who manages capital for investors, predominantly in real estate. And he was talking about, and this was a couple of years ago, before kind of the COVID swings we saw, but the pre-purchase of condos and what they could foreseeably rent them out for. Mm-hmm. And they were already slightly underwater when they purchased them, hoping for that lift in equity growth that went all over the place. And some of the feedback was, at least for the amount of capital that some of his investors were putting forward, they didn't really want to be, they wanted more liquidity, but they were having to tie up such big sums of that capital, hoping for those gains. And they saw some, and they saw drops and everything else. My question to you is, flipping that to, say, Vancouver, where you've seen huge growth over the past 10, 15, 20 years, really, but especially in the past 10, 12 years, you don't have a crystal ball in front of you, but what is the thought process there now in terms of that equity growth? Is there an expectation of that continued growth on the same trajectory we saw, that should be tapered off? Is there a fear that there's been a bit of a ceiling and a correction? What is the investment community saying about equity growth in Vancouver real estate?
Well, in the short term, Vancouver has softened, and softened is a polite real estate term for prices have gone down. And, that's happened Canada-wide. We've seen some of the prices soften in Edmonton as well. The interest rates went up. We kind of hit a wall. After that massive rush of value appreciation, a correction is typically what happens. This isn't unique to 2022, 2023. Anytime there's been a massive run-up of prices, there's an echo of price correction, prices going down. But from a big picture perspective, people are still very, very confident in Vancouver. If you hopped in a helicopter and flew from, the end of the valley in Chilliwack right through to downtown, you'll literally see well over 100 cranes building high rises, low rises, industrial buildings, commercial buildings. The amount of construction going on literally from one end of the Lower Mainland to the other would blow your mind. I've got a place in downtown Vancouver, and just from my balcony, I can probably see about 50 cranes in my sight line building all kinds of different buildings of different sizes. It's unbelievable the amount of construction that's still happening, even in a market correction. And the reason for that is Vancouver is really more of a global city than it is a Canadian city. And so when we think about Vancouver's pricing on a Canadian spectrum, it seems really high. But when we consider that Vancouver isn't competing with Edmonton, Vancouver is competing with Shanghai, Tokyo, Paris, London, Singapore, the prices are still very affordable. When, Dubai, those people from those markets see Vancouver as a solid place to put investment capital. When you pair that with the fact that, Trudeau just released a report saying we're anticipating and targeting 500,000 new Canadians in the year 2023, a large portion of those, 15 to 20% of those new Canadians will be settling in Vancouver. So there needs to be household for those people. That's a demand that is coming up against what is still fairly limited supply in the Lower Mainland. And so that's, those are the two factors that keep driving the Vancouver market, is that it's a very popular place for new Canadians to settle, in combination with the fact that it's a very popular place for global capital when you consider real estate investment against the other top 25 most expensive cities in the world.
Sure. Yeah. And with that, let me play devil's advocate and ask you a question. Obviously, external capital, desirable place to live, immigration, but at the end of the day, it's jobs and it's affordability. Are the jobs there to support that? And then ultimately, is the affordability there in whether it be rental, as we've seen a transition nationwide for more demand for rental, often priced out, or purchasing? I guess my, if I'm going to stake an opinion or a concern, is that the affordability of some of these markets make them less desirable for new immigrants to come and stay, if that cost of living, if that, paycheck isn't there.
So what you're saying is, from an investment perspective, a little more attractive than from a living perspective?
I'm asking the question.
Okay.
I'm kind of painting
Yeah.
it,
Okay,
but
yeah.
putting it there. I'm curious.
Yeah.
Is that the case, or do you foresee that being the case?
Well, I think that's a great question, because I won't debate the point that you made that it's an expensive place to live. The affordability index is extremely high, but on the flip side of the coin, there's a ton of job growth in the area,
Yeah.
and it's a lot of jobs in like the highly skilled industries.
Right.
So the types of new Canadians that end up settling in Vancouver
Sure.
are the higher net worth ones. They're people that come with professional designations, they come with family wealth, they're settling in the area, and the affordability is on par with what makes sense for them.
Right.
Now, to continue that point, though, one of the reasons I really strongly believe in Edmonton's growth is that Edmonton is a terrific place for new Canadians for an entirely different reason. Edmonton has an extremely strong manufacturing sector. It's got an extremely strong industrial sector. There is still oil refining as a big part of Edmonton's economy. And what all of those things mean is there are a lot of jobs in Edmonton that don't require particularly strong English skills, and that also don't require particularly highly skilled work experience.
Sure.
So from the perspective of a new Canadian, you're absolutely right. It's an extremely affordable place to live, in combination with the fact that it's an extremely easy place to get a well-paying job that is well within the boundaries of Edmonton's affordability index.
Right.
So for new Canadians who are coming with less English skills, less work skills, it's an amazing place to get started, and to build a better life for your family. And we see that Canadian success story happen in Edmonton time and time and time again, where the first generation family comes and takes advantage of the fact that the cost of living index is really, really strong.
Yeah.
The second generation, they're getting into med school, they're getting into engineering school, they're getting into law school, and drastically changing through the history and the trajectory of that family. So
Yeah.
from an investor perspective, it's a really, really great place to buy properties that appeal to new Canadians. And because of the affordability index, those properties will make monthly profit by way of cash flow.
Yeah.
So that's a place where we find investors really like putting their capital if they're not super speculative. Speculative just means part of your investment strategy banks on what's going to happen in the future. So when you buy that pre-sale construction condo, you're banking on the market growing.
Yeah.
If it doesn't grow, that really messes with your strategy. Whereas in Edmonton, it doesn't matter if it grows, which is good because Edmonton doesn't grow at the same pace as Vancouver or
Yeah.
Toronto. What matters is that there's a lot of people looking for a safe place to live who are willing to pay market rent, and that market rent is more than enough to cover the cost of owning the property, which makes it a great investment option.
Yeah, and I think that that's a good segue into one of the other questions that we were thinking of asking you, and that's kind of the change in housing typology that we're starting to see in a market like Edmonton. And what I mean is, as we see additional infill growth throughout the city, some densification happening around existing and future LRT stations, things like that. There's a bit of a shift towards more multi-unit housing, multifamily housing, row housing, other arrangements that we just haven't really seen a whole lot of in, for instance, central Edmonton for 40 some years. So I guess the general question that I would have for you is, what are you seeing? How is that changing in the investment world as well? And are there differences in how people are looking at picking up properties now? In the past, maybe an investment property was a single family bungalow. They rent out a basement suite until they can flip the house or something like that. What are the differences we're seeing today? What are people looking for?
Yeah, that's a really smart question because it does indicate what I'm noticing, the trend being towards what our investors are demanding just in terms of acquiring for their own portfolio, because it really has shifted, especially in the last 5 years. And the biggest clue that I'll point to is what the big money is doing, what the institutional money is doing with their capital. If you take a look around Edmonton, in the like near the legislature downtown, we're seeing on 124th, we're seeing all of these brand new towers pop up that have a very similar aesthetic. They've got dark blue glass, gray paneling, white paneling, glass balconies, and then at the very top floor, there's a floor to ceiling glass amenities area.
Yep.
There's close to 10 of these buildings that have popped up in the last what feels like 2 or 3 years. They're just popping up everywhere. The thing about these buildings is they are not condoized. They're not owned by individuals. These are singular use, purpose-built rental buildings that are meant to be owned by institutional investors, be it REITs, trust funds, whatever, specifically to be real estate investments in the city of Edmonton. That means that large-scale Canadian-wide institutional money is recognizing the strong rental market in Edmonton, which is what we were just talking about. There's new Canadians coming in, there's strong rental demand, and there's a demand for nice, high-quality places to live. So what these buildings are doing for the average investor, the mom and pop investor, or maybe, the high net worth investor who's looking to buy multi-unit buildings like you're talking about, is it's putting pressure on quality. So, what would have worked 5 to 10 years ago, buying a 50-year-old bungalow with an illegal basement suite that has a lot of maintenance due, that worked great 5-10 years ago. Now the tenant living in that place is being offered the opportunity for a very similar price point to move into a beautiful brand new amenity rich condo building. And so what these institutional investors are doing by bringing a higher quality product to market is driving a demand for higher quality in the smaller stuff, which are the suited houses, the duplexes, the row houses, the threeplexes. And so what we're seeing in terms of demand from our investors is building exactly what you guys are talking about. The city of Edmonton has really opened up the permitting process to allow secondary suites in 4-unit buildings, creating an essential 8-plex, 3-unit buildings. Secondary suites, basement suited houses, laneway houses. We're allowed to have properties with, upper suite, lower suite, laneway house. Lots of like small multi-unit development, which is very accessible to, someone with a few $100,000 instead of having to be someone with a few $1 million at the very least to build a high rise. Like, we're not building high rises here, but for your average investor, the trend towards newer, higher quality product in the core to stay competitive with this institutional product is what we're seeing with our client base. And it's what we're advising our clients towards, because if you've got something that's tired, low quality, unsafe, not in great shape, those like the quality tenants are being offered the opportunity to move into the institutional product. Now, the good news is there are a lot of people out there that don't want to live in a high rise. There's people that want a backyard. There's people that want a garage. There's people that want a little more space. So that market gap is being filled with this awesome new product that, we're talking about, which is row housing. You can buy a corner lot and put an 8-plex with suites on it, 4-plex. There's a little bit of yard. There's a sense of community because the property exists in a real neighborhood. It's walkable. There's a school nearby. You get more of that family oriented sense as opposed to, an urban setting, which is great, but Edmonton is still transitioning into an urbanized city. It's still really just a giant suburb by most measures. And so people love that style of living, whether it's near the core or, in the fringes of the city.
And
so
go ahead. I was just going to say, and I think it speaks to an increased appetite for more housing choice, more options in the market than we probably had even 10 or 20 years ago. And things that appeal to people at different stages of life. It's not, you live in central Edmonton and Oliver until you're 32 years old, and then you have a couple kids and you move out all the way to Windermere or something like that. It's maybe a little bit of a change in perspective. Maybe you're not moving all the way out to Windermere now. Maybe you can find a great spot in Westmount where there's new row housing or something that fits what your family's looking for, but you still have access to all the great amenities in central Edmonton. So a little bit of a change in the options that people actually have, I think.
Yeah, and I think that also, it's not even just urban too, as we've talked about before. this housing typology change. You see it a lot in some of these new formats in suburban settings too.
Yep.
You've got your stacked townhouses.
Yep.
You've got interesting kind of like walk-up type fourplex things. The idea being that people want choice, and choice comes at different price points, comes with different lifestyles, comes with different things, and so being able to offer that and having a city with a land use bylaw, with zoning, with your permitting process that allows that and allows that easy transition. And sees that transition as part of the nature of an evolving city, especially for a young city like Edmonton, very valuable. A lot of our neighborhoods are 1-2 generations old, and that's it. You go to an older city out east, like Toronto or something, they've seen many generations through neighborhoods, or you go, much older cities across the pond in Europe, and it's it's ever evolving, right?
Yeah.
But when you're used to one thing in one neighborhood, this house has stood here for 40 years, there's been one family there, whatever else, until you start to see that change, then it's like the neighborhood starts to grow and adapt and become more than what was originally put there. And we're a young city. These things happen and evolve over time, and it's good to see the city really embracing that and encouraging that.
Yeah, and it's about building a city that is like where you have neighborhoods that aren't so impacted by traditional neighborhood life cycles as well, where you've got kind of the school age, everybody grows up, the neighborhood starts to empty out, you've just got seniors left over, and your population in that neighborhood is 60% of what it was. Then that's where we are today in a lot of our mature neighborhoods, and we're talking about infill and redevelopment, and theoretically you can get to a place where you've got kind of a mixed bag, where it's not just one type of person, one type of family that's living in a neighborhood. It's just about everything.
And you don't see those, it's the initial swell on the schools, right?
Exactly.
Where they have all the portables, and then it hollows out, and they're thinking about selling the school,
or turning it into a senior's home, or like you see that. So,
anyways, no, that's good. I mean, so James, it's interesting. I the past couple of years, I've beat the drum on housing affordability. I think that is one of the best things about Edmonton. It's a great city. There's a lot of opportunity. That cost of living index, it's a huge component to it. And with moderate middle class incomes, people can have housing ownership. They can take vacations. They can live a great life where they're able to provide. And affordability is a key component of that. Tell me, where do you think, what are some of these directions that Edmonton has taken, I guess, but where do we need to go to not only continue to sell some of these advantages that Edmonton has, but how does Edmonton grow to become a more attractive place, not only for investment capital, but for new immigrant families, for your interprovincial migration? What are you seeing? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm gonna go completely off in the direction of straight opinion articles. So, full disclosure, this is James Knull's opinion and not just me analyzing data. But, I think two things that would make a massive impact in Edmonton's growth is leaning into the tax advantages that we have provincially. When we look at some of the places around the world that have had massive growth that has been prompted by tax advantages, Ireland took themselves in a couple of decades from a struggling country into an economic powerhouse because they built an economic zone around their airport that had massive tax advantages. We've got an insane amount of land between the airport and the city, and if we further pushed the tax advantages of what's going on in Alberta, I think that would attract a ton of businesses to build headquarters and whatnot. So, we don't pay PST and our corporate tax is lower than the rest of the country, but it's incrementally a tax advantage. I think if we went all in on offering great tax discounts, we'd see a lot of businesses relocate here, which would drive the economy in a lot of very substantial ways. The second thing that I think, and this is again personal opinion, is I think what we need to do is take what is often seen as our biggest flaw and put a spotlight on it and completely rebrand it, which is winter.
Yeah.
I know Edmonton's slogan is the city of champions, but when you travel Canadian wide, it seems like Edmonton's slogan is Edmonton. It's not that bad. That's what people often have to say about the city. And it's cute when you're in Edmonton and you get to say that, but it doesn't paint a really attractive picture across the rest of the country.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we get a bad reputation for is just how harsh winter is.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so I think we're taking strides towards branding Edmonton as a winter city, but winter can be a heck of a lot of fun if you create festival and culture around it.
Yeah.
And so, like I remember 4 or 5 years ago, and I think this is still happening, is there's like a start of winter festival on 124th Street
Yeah.
where, there's all the winter fun and they light off fireworks and there's fire barrels outside and it's super fun and et cetera, et cetera. So I think there's major strides that can be made in terms of just putting a highlight on the lifestyle elements of the city, because, from the perspective of most Canadians and even globally, it's a cold, wintry place with not a lot to do, and that's just not the case. So, I think there needs to be investment in shifting the perspective so that people don't come here just for the affordability, they come here for the lifestyle. And I think Calgary actually has a massive, as a case study, Calgary often appears on top 10 lists of most livable cities in the world because they have leaned into the lifestyle choice. Calgary's not that dissimilar from Edmonton. It's just that the mountains are a 1 hour drive instead of a 3.5 hour drive. Other than that, it's a very similar place to live.
Yeah.
And so I think that reviewing, understanding, and learning what Calgary's doing to brand itself as a lifestyle city can apply to Edmonton. Because, Dave, you're absolutely right. You don't need an upper class income to live a posh lifestyle in Edmonton. You can have a lower middle class to middle class lifestyle and have an insane amount of disposable income to have a really fun life. One indicator that I'll point to is that whenever there's a major concert tour going through North America, the types of cities that they'll play double shows in are like Vancouver, Toronto, New York, and then all of a sudden there's a blip on the radar where like Lady Gaga plays 2 nights in Edmonton.
Totally.
Garth Brooks plays 2 nights in Edmonton, et cetera, et cetera. Why are these major acts doing double shows in Edmonton? Because there's enough of an appetite in a city of less than 1 million people to buy super expensive concert tickets for a night out.
Totally.
That's like, it's anecdotal, but it's not false. So like there's a lot going on here that I just don't think is part of the conversation and part of the narrative. And if the big brains in Edmonton can figure out how to start spreading that message, I think that Edmonton as a lifestyle city, in combination of the affordability plus turning winter into a fun activity, that's my 2 cents. Again, full disclaimer. That's James.
I like
article.
it. I mean, I like fresh takes on things, and I like both of those. I'm big believer in winter city strategy and know that it's a long-term thing, but it's something we need to keep pushing. And tax, like an economic initiative zone, great idea. Let's start banging that drum too. So before we let you go, when we were talking about introductions, who are we going to introduce? I said the 4-legged or the 2-legged. And so to our viewers, I want to introduce Griffin, our office dog. And that's one reason why I keep looking down here. This is Griffin. Can you say hi, Griffin? So Griffin's a new puppy for my household, and he came to the office today. And
he's been really well behaved, actually,
he
through
has.
this whole thing.
He has. He was chewing on the Cat 5 cable earlier, which might have ended our stream a little earlier.
Oh boy.
But anyways, so this is a little Aussie doodle, and dogs are a big part of the family. But now that it's going to be an office dog, and my wife owns a gymnastics club, so maybe it has been a dog there too. So
You'll probably see him a couple more times then.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
Well, James, thanks so much for joining us today. That was great. Really interesting conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. I mean, I'm a big believer in Edmonton as a great spot for capital, and it's good to push the conversation forward because it's a great place to do business, and more people need to know it.
Love it. That is a drum that I'll beat all day long. Let's keep in touch, and it would be good to maybe get you back here again sometime in the future, and we'll keep this conversation going.
Hey, wonderful. I'd love to be on again. Thanks again, guys.
Okay, thanks,
Awesome.
James. We'll
Have a
talk
good
to you
one.
later.